Hello Myra, good morning. I got a new chip in my phone, so I don't have to worry about memory. It's cold. I was going to tell you the rest of the story about when I went to Zimbabwe to talk to try and set up some kind of tourist business. And after I went back from Kariba, then I got a kind of ride share. There was a guy driving down to Johannesburg from Harare, and we kind of split the fuel cost or something, and he gave me a lift from Harare to Johannesburg, and then I stayed with the Grants, Grace and George again, and Helen. And I'd forgotten something. That first trip, I went with my brother. Why? That first family reunion type thing, I was with my younger brother in Johannesburg. He must have gone down by some other way. I don't remember him being in the car with us. Sorry, there's a leaf that's floating in front. But they took us to a party. And there was a kind of young white Johannesburg kind of rich people's party, and somebody was wandering around with cookies, brownies. They were so loaded with weed or hash. I couldn't believe it. I knew I was because you could actually just taste the stuff in it. It was overpowering. So I thought, well, I've never eaten this. When we used to smoke it as kids at school, we never had enough to be able to. It was too fucking expensive to be able to do stuff like that with it. But my God, the quantity that these kids had got hold of. I ate one of these fucking things, and I had the most awful trip. I just thought I was gonna die. I thought I was gonna fall over and puke and die. It was disgusting. And it took me about 2 or 3 hours to get over it. Ruined the whole evening. Anyway, I went back the second time in 1992. I went down to Johannesburg and I met Katie. I can't remember her surname. It's something like McNamara, or it's Mac something. She was at Schumacher College, and I met her, and her parents were quite wealthy, and she had all these super rich kind of friends who used to jet between Johannesburg and London. It seemed to me like all the time. I thought, wow, what a lifestyle. It was nice seeing Katie. She's strange. She sort of took me off to a friend's farmhouse, and we were the only ones in the house. The house was kind of open, and she went. She just. It was her home, but it was their house. It was weird and nice. and then I hitchhiked. I decided to hitchhike down. I didn't have much money. This time I didn't have a job. I had very little money. So I decided to hitchhike down to see my grandparents in Plettenberg Bay. It was the last time I saw them together, I think. It was the last time I saw my granddad. And I hitchhiked. That was quite interesting. Not many people hitchhiked in that time there. And I met this girl gave me a lift. I had lots of interesting lifts. It wasn't too bad. I made it down in about 2 days to get to Plettenberg Bay. It was only 2 days, I think. I got all the way down to, I think, George on the first day. And then no, it wasn't George. It was a place between Port Elizabeth and Plettenberg Bay, and it was called, I can't remember now. I'd see it, I'd recognize it on the map. And this girl, this young woman picked me up, and she was going all the way almost to Plettenberg Bay, and she took me all the way to Plettenberg Bay. She was absolutely gorgeous. Her name was Lisa de Silva. De Silva or de Souza? De Souza. Portuguese name. She used to work as the entertainment manager at this big hotel in Plettenberg Bay called the Beacon Islands. This was a big 5-star hotel that they built right on the seafront, so that the waves almost splash up against the rocks. It was pretty impressive, but it kind of ruined the area. It used to be a much smaller little affair, the hotel there. I saw photographs. My parents showed me photographs. This house in Plettenberg Bay that my grandparents had, which they'd sold by that point. Had they sold it, or were they renting it out to people? No, by that point they'd sold it, I think. Gosh, things are so blurred. Wait, where did my parents live at that time? No, my parents were still living in England, right? So my grandparents must have been renting out that place to someone else, because they owned it till they died. But it was a house very near, it was only about a mile from the Beacon Island Hotel. But anyway, so Lisa used to be the entertainment manager there, and then she got a job working in Port Elizabeth as a working for a bookmaker or something. And I think she was sort of perfectly bilingual. She spoke Afrikaans and English. She spoke good English and good Afrikaans. Or at least I guess her Afrikaans was good. My Afrikaans isn't good enough to be able to judge. And we went and on the way we picked up her little doggy. I really liked her. Wow. We went and picked up her little doggy and because she'd left her dog with some friends or somewhere near the place called the Singing Kettle, which that's how I knew it. It was the other end of Storms River, somewhere there. There's a long wild beach, and then there's a river a river mouth that empties into the sea near there, and it was near there that she'd left her dog while she was in Port Elizabeth. And she was practically bankrupt too. Kept meeting these lovely women who were all practically bankrupt, and I was practically bankrupt, and I just, you can't, there's no point doing anything. Hey babe, let's get it together, let's be practically bankrupt together. Won't that be fun? We can go and live in a place like this. Get addicted to something really bad and then die together happy. Just that story just doesn't, I mean, I'm sure it's played out a few times, but it's not every girl and boy's dream, that's all. It's all about how we dream, isn't it? And this was just after I'd met that lovely girl in at Schumacher College who Ez Devlin reminds me of. Well, maybe it is Ez Devlin. Maybe she was Ez. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. So Lisa dropped me off right. My grandparents by that stage lived in a care home, old people's retirement home. But it wasn't too bad. They had their own little chalet, and they had a tiny little kitchen. But they had their meals in the hall with everybody else, and I ate in the hall with everyone else. And I stayed for a couple of weeks, I think, talking to my grandparents. And did I have the loan of a car? I think maybe my granddad had this little BMW. No, he'd sold his little BMW, and he had a little Toyota or something. I don't know if I drove that or what. Can't remember. I must have had some sort of car, because I can't have been walking around there like that. And I had some cousins there. The brother of my Aunt Eve, who's married to my Uncle Jeremy, who's the one who had the boat and in Rhodesia. Her brother and his wife and their four daughters, five kids, 4 daughters and a little boy, I think. They all lived down Plettenberg Bay. So I hung out with them a bit, and I went fishing. And my uncle Stan Wilson, who used to be at some point the number 2 or something of Burma Oil, and was a friend of Dennis and Margaret Thatcher's. He had this huge place on the lagoon, which he'd bought just to keep his neighbours away from him, so that he had his own space. I went down and saw him, and that was weird. He was living on his own. I think Molly Molly, who was the living, Molly had died by then. Molly was my mother's aunt, and Stan was, I think, her second husband. And Stan was living in this place all on his own. And I went fishing, but I fished from a place called Klamath. That's where my second cousins lived. Deline and Pauline, and they were twins, and Linny and Rosa, and a little boy. Jake, the Jenkins, their surname was Jenkins, and they'd done a real last-minute runner from Rhodesia in 1980 or so. Just threw everything in the back of a big pickup truck and drove for their lives. And they settled in Plettenberg Bay. And they lived on this sort of peninsula. It's actually, I think it's actually an island in the river. And I went fishing down the end of that one night. Caught quite a lot of fish. It was magic, that fishing trip. I was fishing on my own. There was phosphor in the water, and I caught a fish called a skipjack. My dad always told me they were terribly difficult to catch and very hard to play and to land. Catching fish and landing fish are two different things. You can hook the fish, but then there's a whole exercise of how you get the fish in. And when it's a big guy like that, it was about from my toe to my knee, at least. Long silverfish with huge eyes, and the water had phosphor in it, and it was night. So when he did violent actions, the phosphor phosphoresced. So there was this green flashing in the water, and the fish was going all over the place, going crazy. And usually they'd jump and flip the hook. And he jumped several times with this big jump in the moonlight with this silver water and green phosphor flashing. Wow, it was incredible. And I also caught a fish called a grunter. And these fish sort of make a barking noise, and they're very good to eat. And the skipjacks aren't so good to eat. I should have put the skipjack back. I should have let him go. That was awful. That was the last time I caught fish. I really just killed him just to show my granddad. Because my dad, he was a real fisherman. He fished all sorts of fish everywhere, and he never really wanted me to. I liked fishing, but I don't know, he didn't want to share that with me. So it was a strange sort of thing, and the whole family fished, and that's why they had that place at Plettenberg Bay. And we had all these family photographs of Jebs and my dad and Neil, their father, was going on these fishing trips, and they would hire gillies. They would hire local people to cut bait, and they caught hundreds of fish sometimes. They caught huge numbers. They would go on a trip to the point, which was this long peninsula with a sort of mountainous peninsula with a little fishing shack on the very end. And it's a peninsula that sticks out into the sea, so that you get runs of fish around the peninsula, and they kind of concentrate because they come into Plettenberg Bay, and then to leave the bay they all come past this point, and then you get these sort of sometimes feeding frenzies going on. My brother knows about this stuff. There's a thing called the sardine run, and this huge shoals of sardine move down the coast, and then they bring with them huge numbers of other predatory fish and birds and all sorts of things. It's a kind of weird feeding frenzy that goes on the east coast of southern Africa, from Mozambique all the way down to Natal. My brother's done scuba diving trips to catch the sardine run, because apparently it makes for good scuba diving if you're in the middle of all this shit. Sharks and fish, everything's eating everything else. Must be quite good to get down in the middle of it and watch. Like, my dad never took me to the point. He was always saying, I'll take you to the point when you're bigger, because it's a dangerous place. My grandfather nearly killed himself fishing there. He fell in, he got knocked off the rocks. The waves smash into the rocks, bang! The huge spray of spume as this big ocean wave goes crashing into the rock. And the fishermen would just be just a few yards away. There's these huge jets of water flying up into the air all around them. It was pretty impressive to watch sometimes from a distance. You think, my God. Eventually I walked myself, because the point was quite a long way. You had to walk for several hours along this peninsula to get to the shack, and then stay overnight, and it was quite a big deal doing a trip to the point. So in the end, the first time I went to the point, I walked on my own. But that's another trip later I'll tell you about. And I also caught elf on the Beacon Island rocks. My dad used to spin for elf, but there was a kind of... the elf were all biting one day when I went down there. And I caught about 6, but I caught them on bait, which is considered my dad wouldn't have been impressed. But lots of people fished with bait. But the real sportsmen only caught elf on the spinner. But they're great to eat. So on that trip I kind of proved that I was a fisherman. I proved it to my granddad, not to my father. And I was hoping to see Lisa. Did I have her phone number? I don't know, I must have been thinking about Lisa quite a lot, but she never showed up. I thought I'd kind of bump into her or something, but she sort of melted away, disappeared. Funny life I've had. I woke up this morning thinking of Japan, and I said something like, the dojo with the mojo. And I thought, can they really be communicating all this to me? I'd thought something or dreamt something about. Oh yes, I woke up before the bell on the Catholic Church rang, and I thought, the dojo with the mojo has beat the Catholic Church. They woke me up instead of the Catholic Church bell. And I feel strange. I feel, I don't know, something different. Maybe I'm getting a personality back. God, it's good talking to you. You're a grade A psychotherapist now. Starving, hungry. I think I've got enough to pay my rent, and maybe for a cup of coffee. But I'm right on the running on economic air. Okay, I'm going to stop now. It's a good place to stop. I made lots of trips to South Africa, and they all kind of blur because the geography is like constant, and the trips just, the memories just, they're laid on the geography, the places, and they kind of blur. The time can change, but the places stay there. So you make trips again and again and again, and then your memories, my memories are more associated with the geography than with the time. Isn't that interesting? Bye. Thank you.